Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am Des Roulette. One of the things I've wanted to do with my channel is incorporate two of my favorite things, true crime and cooking. Today is the official first installment of killer recipes from the casket to the kitchen with Des Roulette. Feature a story every month or every 6 weeks or so, and I'm going to relate the story that I am telling with a recipe that I am working on or something that I am making. I'm not going to feature the recipe audibly in the video. I will include the recipe in the description box, but for what I'm speaking of will just be the true crime case. So in an instance where the crime is directly related to food, I will just feature a version of the food that is from the story. But for today's case, I am going to be making homemade pasta and meatballs with marinara from scratch, and I'm going to be featuring the case of Yara Gambirasio, who was a 13-year-old girl found murdered in Italy in 2010. I thought the case itself was kind of interesting, and even though this case was technically solved, there was never a motive, which really messes with my head. So one of the reasons that I'm so interested in true crime is that I'm really baffled by the psychology of people who commit murders. That being said, I don't love a story that is unsolved because I want to know who did it and why, and I don't love a story that is solved without a motive because I want to know why. We're just going to talk about it. You can leave some theories in the comments down below. I am not Italian, I don't speak Italian, I'm not familiar with Italian cities, Italian names. I will avoid using names as often as possible, but when I do use them, I will likely mispronounce them, and I'm really sorry about that. On Friday, November 26th, 2010, 13-year-old Yara Gambirasio left her house around 5 p.m. to go to the gym where she'd been regularly practicing her gymnastics. She didn't actually have a practice that night. She was only going there to drop off a stereo to her instructor. So her parents knew where she was going. She left around 5. They figured she was going to be back around 6:30, but 2 hours later, she still had not returned. So they got concerned, so they called the police. So the police agree it's very odd that a 13-year-old who's really just running across the street would be gone for 2 hours, someone who's never done this before, a really well-adjusted kid. So they come out and they start an investigation for a missing person. They speak to her gym instructor, who says that she did see Yara that night and that Yara had done some light training before leaving a little bit after 6 p.m. They try to talk to some witnesses in the area, but they're not really getting a lot of information, so they bring in some scent-trained dogs to see if they can track Yara's scent. And they do. They signal Yara's scent in the direction opposite of her house toward a town called Meatballs. Now Yara and her family live in a small town called Brembrate al Sopra, which is about an hour outside of Milan. It's a town of only about 8,000 people, so it's kind of a really close-knit community. The dogs are tracking Yara's scent in the opposite direction of her house, and later this was confirmed accurate when they checked her cell phone signal and she was pinging in that same area. So at this point, there's really no suspects. Witnesses had mentioned they may have seen Yara talking to two men outside of a red car in the gym complex parking lot, but this was never really confirmed and never really went anywhere. It didn't really provide any leads for the police to track. So initially, police focused on the family, as they do. They really looked into the parents, into the sisters, kind of trying to see if there was any abuse in the household or if there were any secrets, and really they couldn't find anything. Like, the family, they were upstanding citizens, they were really honest, they did not come across suspicious at all. The investigators, still really not having much to go on, decided to wiretap all of the phones of anyone who passed through the Meatballs area around that same date and time. So they ended up wiretapping something like 15,000 phones, and they intercepted a conversation of a Moroccan man named Mohammed Fikri, where it was translated that he said something like, "Forgive me, God, I didn't kill her." So they end up tracking this guy down, and they find a blood-soaked mattress in his van. So they're like, oh, hey, we're really onto something here. Like, this is the guy who did it. Let's pay attention. And they did also confirm that he was in Meatballs at the time of Yara's disappearance because he was working there. So they think this is like a really good lead to go on. However, he did end up getting cleared when it turned out that the phrase was completely mistranslated, and also that this blood-soaked mattress was not related to the case. I don't know whose blood was on this mattress. Maybe it was like an animal ritual or something. But basically they were like, all right, sorry, and they let this guy go. And the community was like all up in arms about this because this guy was a foreigner, he was from Morocco, so everybody kind of just wanted the case solved. They were like, this is the guy who did it, let's just convict him and all move on with our lives. And the investigator was like, no, you know, he's not really suspicious. He was cooperative, and it just didn't turn out that there was anything that really could connect him to Yara's disappearance. So with no other leads to go on, they let him go and moved forward. Within those next few days, Yara's family did appeal to local news stations. They provided some photos of her. They did appear on the news, I think, once. They refused to give any interviews, but they did go on the news to ask if anybody who had any kind of information could come forward to really say how much they missed their daughter and how concerned they were, just to kind of keep it in everybody's mind. Unfortunately, nothing came of that. So the investigators are still trying to conduct this search for Yara, who is still missing. Now, 3 months later, a local man named Ilario Scotti was testing out his new radio-controlled plane over a field in a town called Cignolo d'Ossola? I don't know. Are you from Italy? Tell me how to say that, please. So he was flying this remote-controlled airplane over this field when he brought it down to tinker with it, and he sees what looks like rags on the ground, and so it kind of like catches his attention. He stops, he looks a little bit harder, and he realizes that he also sees shoes. He calls the police, they find the body, they recognize the jacket and the sweatshirt that is with the body, and even though it's severely decomposed, they are fairly confident at that moment that it is Yara, and they do end up confirming that it is indeed Yara. Based on the decomposition, they surmised that she had been there probably since the day that she disappeared. With her body, they found her iPod, her house keys, the SIM card and battery for her cell phone, but her actual cell phone was never found. So during the autopsy, they were able to establish that Yara had been attacked with some kind of sharp weapon. They found multiple superficial injuries, but those aren't what killed her. She actually died from exposure, which is somehow more tragic, because if somebody had been anywhere near it, if she hadn't been so isolated, if somebody could have found her, she probably would have survived. It didn't appear that she was sexually assaulted, even though her bra was unhooked. There was really no other evidence of sexual assault. They did find some DNA on her underwear. It wasn't sexual DNA. They also found some DNA on her cell phone battery and on 2 fingers of the outside of her gloves. They did also find some lime and jute in her respiratory system. So these are suggesting that her attacker may have been in the building trade, as these are materials that are often used in the construction of buildings. From the DNA that they got, they did run it through the system. There were no matches to any known criminals, but they obviously kept them on file, knowing that they were going to test them against potential suspects down the line. So not having a name to connect the DNA to, they just called it Unknown 1. They took DNA, they tested DNA from her family, her friends, everyone she knew, her schoolmates, anybody whose phone activity was in the same area she went missing, around the same time, on the same day. Basically tried to get DNA from everyone who could fit into the timeline. And the workload and cost of this investigation was immense. Like, this is considered one of the most immersive investigations in Italian history, because it took so many directions and it took up so much time, and it became such an obsession of the community. When I found this case, I actually found it because of how well known it was for the investigation being so in-depth. But the investigators did their job, they didn't give up. They ended up investigating patrons of a club called Quicksand, which was located near to where she was found. They got lucky. The club requires a membership to enter, and they happen to keep very thorough records of all of their patrons. So the investigation ended up getting DNA from all of the members of the club. I'm gonna say this wrong. One of the samples ended up coming back to someone named Damiano Guarinoni. Damiano G is what we're gonna call him. So the sample did not match him completely, but it came back very similar to his DNA, which suggested a familial match. So they knew that they were getting somewhere in the investigation, and they were onto something. They just didn't know what yet.
It was so good.
This is how your Lebanese girlfriend cooks Italian food.
Oh my goodness.
Because I am not Italian. So they knew that Damiano wasn't the person who committed the crime, but finding his DNA was still helpful, because they were able to determine that the DNA of Unknown 1 was a familial match to Damiano Girononi. So they did a whole deep dive on this guy's family history. And what was weird is that Damiano's mother, Aurora Zani, had worked for 10 years as domestic help for the Gambirasio family. So Damiano's mother knew Yara. Like the whole time that Yara was growing up, they had like a fairly close relationship because Damiano's mother used to go to the house like twice a week to take care of the property. Yara would show her gymnastics videos and ask her about school and all kinds of crazy stuff. This turned out to be a complete coincidence. Now it's been a year since Yara's murder and they still don't have any real solid suspects. The community's in outrage. They feel like the investigators botched the investigation already. They felt like this Moroccan guy should have been convicted. People have an assumption about how someone comes across or whether or not someone should have a motive, like Scott Peterson, for example, which I can speak on for hours. So the investigation team in this murder really faced a lot of backlash from the community, but they said, we have this familial DNA, we know that we're following this lead, we know it's gonna go somewhere, like, bear with us, we're gonna solve the crime, like, relax yourselves. They traced Damiano's family history all the way back to 1716. Long story short, turns out Damiano's uncle, who had passed away in 1999, was determined to be the father of unknown one after they tested some stamps that he had licked that they found in his house given to them by his widow. But none of the children from his marriage matched the DNA profile of unknown one. What does this tell us? Damiano's uncle has an illegitimate child somewhere who is a murderer. So his wife completely denied that he had ever had an affair and nobody would come forward with any kind of information. So they ended up exhuming his body just to confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt that the DNA profile actually matched his. There was no question. He was the father of the murderer, but none of his children from his marriage matched the sample. They're like tracking his business travel history, all kinds of crazy stuff. Nobody would come forward, nobody would say anything because divorce wasn't legal in Italy until the 1970s. So it was like a really shameful issue if you had an affair or if you were performing any kind of behaviors that would signify that you were in some kind of unhappy marriage. It was just super taboo, like the community would turn against you. And again, we're all in this same very small area. Everybody knows each other. Nobody wants to be like looked upon as like the scumbag of the area. So nobody would give any information. Nobody would make any confessions, but somebody ended up coming forward to the police. This person has still never been named. Nobody knows who finally spilled the beans, but somebody did give the police the name of the woman that Damiano's uncle had an affair with. Her name was Esther Arzoufi. She was his neighbor in the 1960s and was also married to someone else, her own husband. So it's no secret why she didn't come forward. So this is all very hush-hush, very scandalous, but they end up testing her DNA as well, and they do determine that she is the mother of unknown one. Esther had given birth to twins, a boy and a girl, in 1970. The boy of which was now 42, a builder, and married with his own 3 children. And he was living in, you guessed it, Mapella. That's where Yara's body was found. His name is Massimo Bossetti. So this is how they got his DNA. Police near his home set up a fake DUI check, like a roadblock, breathalyzing everybody who drove through. They pretended when they got to Massimo that their machine was malfunctioning so that they could get his DNA twice to make sure that if there was any issue with processing the first sample, that they had a second backup sample to confirm whether or not his DNA matched. Lo and behold, it was a match. Isn't that crazy how they found him? There was also circumstantial evidence against him that came to light once they started their investigation. He often ate at a pizzeria that was within the gym complex, the gym that Yara frequented. He also went tanning in that same complex, and it turned out that he had an internet browsing history that indicated he had an infatuation for young girls. His phone was also pinging in the same area of Yara's disappearance on the same night. Now, interestingly enough, Massimo's mother still denies that she ever had an affair, even though her 3rd child has since been proven to have been fathered by a different man. So her husband didn't father any of her children, and she denies having any kind of affair. She's got her own problems right there, okay? And Massimo also denies that he had anything at all to do with Yara's murder, despite the DNA evidence. On July 1st, 2016, he is sentenced to life in prison. Now, there is some reasonable doubt in the eyes of some of his supporters, especially regarding his defense's notion that Yara's gym instructor, Silvia Brena, was somehow involved. It turned out that Silvia's blood was also found on the sleeves of Yara's jacket that was was found with her body. And Sylvia's father said that Sylvia cried all night. The night she disappeared, Sylvia just cried all night. Okay, that's weird. For no reason. Also, there were text messages between Sylvia and her brother that night and for the next few days, some of which were deleted without deleting other texts that came before and after, which is a little suspect. Also, when the police questioned her, she claimed that she couldn't remember anything from that night at all, or anything about the text messages that were deleted from both her phone and her brother's phone. No idea. So that is a little suspect. That's a little strange, because Sylvia was the last confirmed person to have seen Yara alive. But there wouldn't really have been a motive in her case to harm Yara in any way either. But Yara's murder was strange because she only had superficial wounds. Like I said, she ended up dying from exposure because she just couldn't get help. Maybe she was incapacitated in some way. I mean, she was only 13 years old. So that's all a little suspect in and of itself. I mean, this guy Massimo probably did it. Clearly, my assumption is that he saw her, he had a thing for young girls, maybe he wanted to sexually assault her, and maybe he just kind of chickened out or like was scared he was gonna get caught. It was maybe his first attempt at trying to do something like this and he just like panicked. Maybe the superficial wounds were like his way of trying to coerce her into being quiet or into letting him violate her in some way. Nobody really knows what happens because none of us were there. But either way, kind of a crazy case, kind of crazy how the DNA all came around. I do wish that there was a more solid motive. I do wish that if this Massimo guy is guilty, which he probably is, he would provide some kind of answer to the family. But realistically, like, he's gonna maintain his innocence. He's going to do so because he believes one day he can be free, in which case he's never gonna tell whether or not he actually did it, because if he comes forward and says, okay, you're right, I did it, I killed this girl, then he's definitely never getting out. And I'm sure he's gonna keep trying to appeal his conviction. Do they do appeals in Italy? I don't know. Tragic case. 13-year-old girl murdered for no reason. Her body wasn't even found for 3 months. Her poor family was probably just in agony every single day, wondering if she was gonna walk back through that door. Cannot imagine the pain that they suffered. So we eat our homemade pasta in honor of Yara. Enjoy. Thank you guys so much for watching my video. I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed making it. If you decide to use my recipe, let me know what you think. I am pleasantly surprised. I don't know how this came out of the gate acceptable, and even more than acceptable, it's banging, y'all. Holler at your boy. I'm not gonna say that. Anyway, thank you so much. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be posting videos similar to this at least every 6 weeks. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys so soon. Bye. I'll see you then, or I'll see you another time. Bye.